February 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 16th. And I think we did that quite a little while ago, had some time to review those. Rose even gave you a cutoff date for your revisions if you had any. We did not receive any. So for that, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So moved by Representative Estes, seconded by Representative Brantley. All in favor of approving the minutes for the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 16th, say aye. All opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. Minutes are approved. Thank you very much, Rose, for your hard work on those. Appreciate it. And then we are going to do a similar, but hopefully a little different twist and another conversation around innovative assessment pilot and cut scores and state assessment. Dr. Harwood and Dr. Nugent, whoever would like to go first. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So we will do it a little differently because Dr. Nugent will be talking to you instead of me. For like the half of you who have heard this presentation last week, there is a lot of crossover. The difference would be is that we're only covering the KSD portions, not any other portions, because that's on your agenda for tomorrow. So I'll introduce Dr. Nugent, who is the Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Learning Services for KSD, and then I'll come back at the end and wrap up a little bit.
Excellent. Dr. Nugent, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sir Chair. Many of you have heard, as Dr. Harwood said, some of this information, and I'll try to give it just a little bit different slant where I can, but some of it also is straightforward. And then I'm really happy at the end to dive into the IADA portion and KSDE's role in that. So what I'm going to cover today is the state assessment cut scores and concordance table. A lot of this is what I have covered, I believe, in K-12 Ed Committee previously. I'm just going to touch on post-secondary success and just show some of the correlation between our alignment, and then I will hit innovative assessments towards the end today. I wanted to talk a little bit again about why there was.
We might pause you just to make sure the screen is up for us to be able to see some of what you're going for. Is there a presentation for this portion? Yeah. What? There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. I wasn't paying attention to your screens.
You're good.
I just wanted to remind the committee that the Kansas State Assessment was a new assessment this year in 2025. In 2017, new standards were adopted or revised more so in 2017. And then the ELA standards in 2023 were adopted to match the science of reading. Additionally, we wanted to align the assessment with benchmarks, and the previous math and ELA assessments were created in 2015. After 10 years, it was time to look at a new assessment, again, to align with those 2017 and 2023 standards updates. KSDE awarded the contract in 2019, and the latest assessments align with the science of reading. When we're looking at this as an overall priority, we're looking at really three different decision points. First, content standards, what students must learn, know, and be able to do. Followed by the assessment, how did the test measure those standards? And then the performance levels or the cut scores, how do we define proficiency? So rigor isn't lowered, blueprint is still now aligned to the standards, and I have the word reset in red here because we don't really reset cut scores, we set cut scores anytime an assessment changes. That's a requirement. Why did we set performance levels? When a new assessment is developed, that means new items have to be field tested, new statistical properties have to be established, and then there has to be a standard setting occurrence as well as a peer review. Those are requirements. They're not optional when it comes to any type of formalized accountability assessment. Prior to these new assessments, we were seeing that only 1 in 4 of our students were scoring at a level 3 or 4. And yet, as I'll show later on with that post-secondary success data, more than half were actually going on to succeed post-secondary college or career in college or career pathways. So many students were labeled not proficient, but they were very much on track for post-secondary success. This created a lot of confusion for families, even for the students themselves, and especially for the teachers who are trying to align all of the above. So the old definition of proficiency, or level 3, was on track for post-secondary success. But again, we were finding students who were not scoring at level 3 also proving to be on track for post-secondary success. So the new level definition says level 3 is proficient in grade level standards. So this changed language clarity and alignment more to student outcome data. What assessments tell us is that students scoring at level 1 and low level 2 really face the greatest barriers. And we're going to have to do a lot to provide additional support. Our standards are still very rigorous, and our accountability remains annual, as is required by state and federal law. I want to hit a little bit on this data point, which shows, if you look at the green column is graduation rate according to whether or not a student what the student scored per level. So green is ELA, blue math, and then that lighter shade of green is ELA post-secondary and math post-secondary. And then the last two columns are ACT and math ACT, ELA and math ACT. So in the 2017 to 2020-21 data, you can see in that high level 2, students were performing high graduation rates, high post-secondary success rates, and really solid ACT rates, and not being labeled proficient. And that was a big misnomer. Also, with the new assessments, we updated our performance level descriptors. Again, as I shared previously, level 3 used to say college and career ready skills. Now level 3 says a student shows a proficient ability to demonstrate knowledge and skills at those content grade level standards. So the verbiage was aligned to how students were performing. We know at level 1, students have a very limited ability to demonstrate their knowledge and skills. They are going to need the most support. A lot of low level 2 also will need support. The concordance table has been talked about so many times, I know, in these committees, and I'll just kind of reiterate some of the high points of a concordance table. And in full transparency, no one talks about this better than Dr. Harwood, so if I get confusing, I have no qualms with him stepping in here. But essentially, the concordance table really shows the relationship between scores from two different assessments. It is not intended to measure student to student. It's literally a translation to talk about trend discussion. So we can look at the old assessment trends and the new assessment trends. It really helps us look at score patterns. It doesn't recreate an old test, and it doesn't inflate performance, and I will show a little bit more of that. When we look at the concordance table, it's really just a way to convert those 2024 CAP scores to the 2025 scale. So not question by question, they're two different tests. We're looking at the scales. This is within the same grade and subject area. For group level analysis, I can't stress this enough, this isn't about looking at individual student data. It's about trend data overall by grade levels in schools. And then we can use the correct concordance table for each grade in each subject area. So you can't use a concordance table for ELA and expect it to have the same results as math. With the concordance table, as I said, it's not used to compare individual student scores or different subjects. And I know Dr. Harwood stresses this every time he's in front of you, but it's really not about an individual decision. One test is not. We have to look at a plethora of data to really make good decisions about how students are performing. This is that one time-stamped data set on the state assessment. So I know that you've seen this grade 3, or many of you have, the concordance table before. On the left, you have the scale scores from 2024. And in the right column, you have the scaled scores from 2025. This is typically on one page. We have to divide it up to get it to fit on the slide. The scaled scores aren't using the same numbers, and that's on purpose, so that way there is less confusion as they are two completely different tests. And so when we look at level 2 in 2024, you can see that from 277 to 299 scaled score, that was a level 2 in 2024. And in 2025, the scaled score for level 3 was 540 to 606. So there's about a 9 percentage point difference in terms of an increase in proficiency. But if you look down on that scale, level 4 proficiency actually decreased according to the new concordance table. Just to look at this in a little bit of a different, here's math, same thing. In this case, level 3, actually, there were fewer students in level 3 and in level 4, and level 2 scores had an 8 percentage point difference the opposite way. So we didn't see great growth in level 3 and third grade math based on the concordance table. If you look at it in this lens, your left column is the actual score from 2024. The right column is the actual score from 2025. And the middle is that point of where the concordance comes in. And you can see that there isn't, it creates a bridge between what those two scores are. So you're not seeing just a flat fall off from 2024 to 2025. When you look at the results in this manner, you can see greater alignment, more so in ELA than I'll show in math. But it used to be you might see grade 3 had a high level of level 3s, and then grade 4 it dropped off dramatically, and then grade 7 the scale was very skewed. With our cut scores, we have better alignment. Now, obviously, we are not thrilled that when grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 hit, we start to see a major decrease in our level 3s and our level 4s. We have a lot of work to do in that area. I think this is another example of this was not inflated. If we would have gone in just to inflate scores, I would not be presenting to you these very dreary statistics at this level. I can stop here and take questions before I move on to innovative assessments.
I have a couple questions. Representative McNorton can kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I've seen this 2 or 3 times now. So if I'm a teacher in a class and I'm going to give my kids a math test, I think I've taught them this, and I think they should know how well they're going to do on that before I give them the test. So did you guys take this new data and decide where the smart kids were, or decide how well they did off what you expected them to do? Do you understand my question?
I think so. Let me try to answer, and if I don't answer
Okay.
it correctly, you can stop me. So how the cut scores were determined were 150 educators came in and reviewed the questions on the test. They didn't look at how kids were scoring or how they answered the questions. They looked at the questions on the test. And from those questions, they aligned which standard it applied to and what skill level it was according to that standard. For example, a basic knowledge skill question would be a lower level, level 1 or 2 skill, and a higher thought process question would be a level 3 or a level 4 questions. So they looked at all the questions and disaggregated, this many questions fall in level 1, this many questions level 2, and that is how scores were determined. So it didn't have anything to do with how smart kids answered. It was taking the questions and determining the level that those questions fell, the level of proficiency those questions fell into.
So you're saying beforehand, they knew if you answered this question, you probably had a level 4. If you couldn't, you're a 3 or below. Or is that correct?
Kind of. If you answered a level 4 question, if you answered a question that was determined to be very high depth of knowledge, then you scored, you got a certain score for that question. So there are questions that we really just want to know, do students understand the very basics of finding the term, understanding if it was an addition, subtraction problem, versus having to do a multi-step problem that required a lot of thinking and disaggregating of the data. That's how the level of a test question is determined, at the depth of the standard it covers.
I understand that. So to answer my question, if they got the, maybe Frank can help me, if they got the more in-depth one, that's a level 4 question. So that would make, at least on that one question, a level 4. Everybody below it would be a 3 or below. If it was a basic question, all 4 of them would get it correct, or in theory. So is that where you cut your determination at based on how they scored on those questions, or did you get the data together and say, boy, these people should be in level 3?
Yes, we got
It
the,
just seems like we made the cut score based on where we thought they should be more than what the predetermined questions would have told us. If you understand,
I'm not sure I'm understanding, so maybe Frank can step in.
So any one question was at a level. So, so how the questions broke out by difficulty, along with how many you got right or wrong at each level, would place you on the scale. And then as they were looking at the scale, that's how the cut scores then came through to it. So it's a combination of how many did you get right, but then what depth of knowledge was required to get that right. So if you just got one level 4 question right, you're not level 4. If you just missed one level 1, you're not level 1. You have to take all the questions together.
but the score was determined before you got the test results.
So,
The level 4 score was determined before you got the test results.
so one of the things that you're doing is you're also validating questions. So the test was done, but then, so the teachers were then, without looking at how students score, what they got right or wrong, determined what those were, and then what the students got right or wrong were applied to the scale.
Say that again, please.
So you said you did this before the test was done. So the students took the test in the spring. This work was done in the summer, so they were there. But the teachers that were doing the work and putting together the scale were looking at questions before they saw student performance. So they made the scale, and then you would put student performance to that scale.
Okay, so they did create the scale based on where they thought a level 4, level 3, whatever it was. And then they took the data and plugged it into that scale instead of the other way around.
Yeah, so they were then able to look at that and say, well, let's look at the performance on this question, and did we scale the question correctly? So that they would then they would look at student performance and say, well, did we get that right? And so there could be some tweaking afterwards, but the scale in general was done ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Estes.
Thank you. So when I look at the new descriptors for the levels, advanced makes perfect sense. You can take the knowledge that you've learned, you can manipulate it, you can apply it to higher abstract thoughts. Proficient makes sense to me. That's saying that you can consistently answer the question related to that. Where I have trouble is with basic and limited. And I've never had a sense in all of our discussions of what consistency are you answering the basic concepts with? Because I think what you're trying to say is that they can hit the basic things. In math, in third grade, they know the multiplication facts. Is that a correct interpretation?
I would agree with you. That's how I would interpret basic. They have a very basic grade level understanding at that basic. They're not applying that at that deeper, higher depth of knowledge. Now, setting those terms, basic, proficient, that was prior to me coming in, so I'm happy to find out for you the rationale behind that terminology. I would be happy to do that. I'm not comfortable answering because I'm just not sure the rationale behind that.
Okay. If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. So then when, so that means, hey, your third grade, you know your basic multiplication. Does that mean that you are able to multiply a question with more digits? Does it just mean that you're reading words, but does it mean that you are able to read a passage? That's what I'm struggling with. And then with the idea of limited, I find that's the descriptor that gives me the least amount of information, other than it's not a good thing and not what we're all mutually aspiring to. Do I interpret that as we can't do the basic things?
So the parent report does give a little more information around some of the levers around if a student was basic, what they probably did understand versus what they didn't. But again, it could be better, and part of what I'm going to talk about in the next segment hopefully addresses some of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. I struggle at times understanding this math standard piece, so maybe you can clarify something. How often are standards reviewed?
They're on a rotating basis, and I should know the answer to this, but I want to say it's every 4 to 7 years.
7 years? So if the new standards were written in 17, when were they reviewed?
There were very minor changes to math, and I believe they were reviewed and approved, well, up until they were approved in 17 for math.
And when were they approved after that?
Those are in review. I should say I don't know when the board approved them. Maybe they were reviewed in 17, but they are under review. All of our standards are constantly being reviewed, but I'm not sure when the next revision for math is due.
Would they have been due in 24?
Perhaps, however, there was a pause during COVID because we were redoing the test. So in terms of, I'm not sure if things stayed on schedule during COVID or not. I'm just not sure.
So I guess I'm a little confused.
Sorry, they just clarified. It was 2022 when math was reviewed again.
Can you get us some specs on that, when they
Sure.
were reviewed, who reviewed them? Because I still have some questions on
Absolutely.
that actual time and when that happened. I have another follow-up question. On the 150 educators, were those representing all the different grade levels?
Yes, all grade levels that are tested and school class size levels and areas of the state.
So how many educators represented each grade level?
Gosh, I was there that day. I can get a list for you. I would guess anywhere from 10 to 15 per grade level, but I can get a list.
And they represented all areas around the state?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I have to read this because this thought got emailed to me, and I just kind of want to put it out. And I think it kind of is close to what Representative McNorton was trying to get to a little bit. But in regards to this group of teachers, group of educators, diverse and all of that, but there is a big difference between judging based on what panelists think a student knows and what a student should know in each subject area by grade. Or any of the cut score evaluators or teachers who have, or any of the cut score evaluators, teachers who have since admitted they didn't understand state standards or didn't realize their curriculum was not at grade level. So has there been feedback after the fact of maybe they didn't understand any of the standards or didn't look at their grade level curriculum maybe being a little off?
I know during the process, there was training that was happening on how to make these determinations. I've not received any feedback similar to what you've shared.
And then I have a much simpler question, and it goes to just the different numbering. I look at this and just the numbers changed a lot. What can you explain, why the numbers went from the 200s to the 4 and 5? What was the reason for that?
Yes, that is not indicative of anything that is.
Sure, and I'm not saying that it is.
I think it was
my
just
curiosity.
honestly to create a little less confusion, so you didn't think question 1 equaled this number. It was just to take a set, this is how we're going to describe this set, this test. These numbers are going to describe this test. There was not a particular reason other than we thought you could keep them very separate and less confused.
Thank you for that. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have, or somebody have, how many questions the students got right and how many they got wrong?
I'm not sure. I can find that out for you.
I would love to know that because I think that's important. And I would also like to know, if I may have a follow-up, do we have any other states that when they have changed cut scores that they followed the same procedures that KSDE did?
I believe so. They followed the procedures that are set forth by Technical Advisory Committee in making the determination on cut scores. So this is standard practice.
Across the nation?
I can't speak for across the nation, but I know they followed the protocol that is required by the federal requirements.
Can we get copies of those?
Sure.
Can we get any information? Because when you conduct research, you set your parameters, and you don't change those parameters after when you do your data analysis, you do it based on what you set up. So I'm struggling to understand. We had all these students take the test, and then, oh, we think they should, we might know. It's a little, I'm struggling to understand, and so the more information you can provide with specifics would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Representative Brantley, I think we'll do the last one, and then she can continue on her presentation. Oh, sorry. You think you need to ask a question? Yeah, we'll come to you next. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm back to this 2022 review of standards. I believe it was 2023 at KATM, the director of math said we would be reviewing the standards coming up that year. We didn't get to the review of those standards, and then we found that the assessment was rewritten and it would be too late to review the standards. So maybe I had that misunderstanding, but I would really like some clarification on that.
I will get that to you, Representative Brantley. Mm-hmm.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I forgot to clarify or ask. So on the concordance tables you showed us, there's different scales for the different categories. Why is that? If you had the scale set, knowing that if a person got 25 right that were number 4s, why are the scales different for the math and ELA? To me, those would have been the same.
So there aren't an equal number of questions per level.
Why not?
And so the table looks different based on the levels of questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you for your answers. I'll let you continue on your presentation.
So I'm hoping that this part of the presentation might make you understand a little bit. Some of you obviously understand some of the struggles we face with our current assessment. We are looking now at a potential pilot with an innovative assessment program that would be a curriculum-directed through-year assessment. As I've shared with you before, Kansas has a school improvement model that takes 4 fundamentals that we believe if we focus on 4 things and do them well, we will see improvement in outcomes. Those fundamentals are structured literacy, standards alignment, balanced assessment system, and quality instruction. And today I'm here to really talk about the balanced assessment system and how these other fundamentals really tie into that. So currently, there are 6 districts who have started testing the model. I will say they're not testing the model at an accountability level yet. That's what the IADA would start to explore. We're currently partnering with Olathe and Kansas City, Kansas, and some other select districts to really pilot this work. In our pilot, we are going to send a letter to IADA. IADA is the federal authority that allows states to design, pilot, evaluate, and scale innovative assessment practices, which we believe is what our pilot schools are doing. It is a federally approved pathway. It maintains federal and state accountability requirements, and so I want to walk you through some of that today. Through IADA, districts can utilize this innovative assessment as an alternative to the statewide summative assessments. So in place of our current assessment, we would be asking the IADA to use this form of assessment for some schools in the pilot to test out comparability with the summative assessment. This would be used for federal accountability and reporting. And because there's a state requirement for assessments, our state board would have to approve us going through the IADA. That was sent as a receive item to them in February, and next week I'll be going to ask for their approval for this pilot. If and when the state board approves the pilot next week, then we would submit an intent to apply to IADA on March 17th. Intent to apply is not a requirement, but we would like to give the feds a heads up that we would be submitting an application. The applications are due May 1st, and then the feds have 90 days to respond to that application, and if approved, that pilot can last up to 5 years. The vision is that we want kids to get better. We have to strengthen our accountability. You already have seen that we have some barriers in our current system. We believe that trying this pilot would strengthen accountability through some more alignment. We really want to drive coherence. We don't want to take a test at the end of the year, and then teachers at that grade level can't do anything with that data. So this assessment allows 3 to 4 tests throughout the year that are aligned to curriculum and aligned to standards, and then provide feedback to teachers to adjust instruction, provide intervention as necessary so those standards can be met and mastered in a more timely manner. We're hoping then also this eliminates some redundancy, protects some instructional time. When teachers know that the assessment they're given can provide direct feedback to them as a teacher and to students, then that testing time becomes more meaningful and relevant. In addition, families then get information throughout the year on how they're performing versus at the end of the year or sometimes the following year on a previous year's assessment. So it's important to remember we're really proposing this as a pilot. I have high hopes for this, and tomorrow you're going to hear from the team who is piloting in these 6 districts more extensive. And I will say I've been to Olathe to observe their PLC model. I'm going to Great Bend to observe some of their work next week. I'll be going out to Dodge City at the end of March. If we were just to substitute this 4-part assessment with the state assessment, we're not going to see gains. It's about the process and alignment of instruction, the materials we use, the feedback we give, that will cause us to have the greatest gains. So this isn't going to lower accountability. We're still going to have a peer review process. We're still going to have to set cut scores in a way that is acceptable to the federal government. And we're going to have an annual summative determination. Okay? Although we'll be giving this test throughout the year, we have to have a big picture summative score that meets the requirements of the law. So I just want to reiterate that what I'm proposing for this pilot really aligns to the true school improvement process. Yes, we would be revamping the balanced assessment system, but then we would ensure that standards are aligned throughout the process, not waiting till the very end to try to measure, and also aligning our instructional practices accordingly. I'll pause for questions around the IADA.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question, I think you answered it, but I'm not positive. Is this pilot in place of the state assessments or in addition?
So that's a great question. So we're going to start it in somewhat of phases. So Olathe and Kansas City, Kansas have been doing this pilot the longest. They truly have the structures in place that we're confident that we can have some comparability to replace it. The other schools are almost there, and we want to get to that point where it replaces the state assessment, but we need to see comparability to start off. So at some point, this would take the place of the state assessment. For some pilot schools, they may still be doing both to start. Remember, they're all doing it now, but not for that statewide accountability score. And so when you put that pressure in front of people, that changes the nature in a good way, but we have to set the system up to do it right. And so I want the structures in place prior to us going full on.
Just as a follow-up, it would be helpful to me. I know we do the NAEP. I know I would like a list per grade level of what formal assessments are happening. I left teaching after No Child Left Behind. I'm really kind of tired of, I got tired of, the whole teaching to the test kind of mindset. And so I want to make sure that we are not heading back there. But having a better picture of what we're asking our teachers to do as far as assessment goes, so I can better understand how much time do they have to actually teach.
I really appreciate your teach to the test point. So I've taught through all of the No Child Left Behind stuff too. So I've been on both extremes. We've taught to the test. We've given a test that we really cover a lot of standards and not a lot of information. I really believe this could be the marrying point of.
All right, seeing no other questions. Rebecca, Representative Schmoy, she was whispering your first name in my ear, so that's.
It happens
my
every
fault.
time. It's fine.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious with the IADA, since that is a federal program, does that come with federal funding to put through the test and to do all of the back end stuff, or is that something that the state will be covering?
So the IADA waiver does not come with funding. We do believe there are some funding sources at the federal level that we will explore for this. But specific to the IADA waiver, no funding attached to that.
Okay, thank you.
And I do believe Dr. Harwood wants to end this strong, so I can give this back to him.
I have a couple more questions, and one of them might be for Dr. Harwood, but, so one is the annual summative determinations will remain, but if, say this works, and I'll probably ask this question tomorrow with the group that's kind of leading, piloting this, but would that be kind of just adding up the 4 that are happening through the year and putting them in their quadrants, and we get a score out of that? Would that, I mean, is that?
Right, so I don't want to
Easy
take away the
concept.
thunder for tomorrow,
Sure.
so I'm going to briefly answer this. So the beauty of the pilot assessment is that we are required to cover standards, but Great Bend may do standards in a different order than another town, right? And so we would be hesitant to give 4 individual scores, but at the end, a summative score. However, all 4 scores, all 4 assessments have information that they provide to teachers, and they do let you know how you scored on the standards given at that time. But it still would require a full summative score. And they will answer that question very, very detailed for you tomorrow.
Thank you for that. And this is kind of going back to how we're not talking about the pilot for just 1 second, but also talking about this ask to do it differently. How long have we done the style of assessment where we have it the year before we get the results, in the next school year? How long have we done it that way?
So we've honestly, we've done a better job of getting scores at the end of the year in May, with the exception of when you develop a new test. Then you're doing all of that work to get the scores. That's why there was a longer delay this year, and that happens every time a new test is given. So typically, we really like to have the scores by the end of May, but still, that isn't enough time to provide intervention.
Correct. Then I guess it's just kind of a hypothetical, but, this idea that's floating, was KU or the assessment team through the University of Kansas ever instructed to entertain a different style of assessment to get those scores back?
That would be
Curious
before my
question.
time, Chair Getz, so I'm just not sure.
We can float it to
Sure.
Dr. Harwood
Yes.
at the end and see if we can find, I mean,
Sounds
it's
good.
just that
I
there's
can
some,
find that out for you.
thank you. Oh, Representative Estes.
Thank you both. Did I hear you say that one of the benefits is being able to measure improvement or growth?
So you will understand where your students are scoring at the time you give that benchmark assessment or 9-week assessment, or however a district chooses how often they give it. I believe then you have opportunities to do the intervention so some growth can occur. Remember, standards build upon one another. So yes, my hope would be that you understand where a student didn't understand a concept that was taught or a skill that was taught. You provide the intervention, and then growth occurs by the next time there's an assessment.
Okay, so under what you just described, though, you would really only see growth if you repeat the same test, though.
Yeah, we're not giving the same test again, so that is true. I mean, it's not a repeat. It's just an opportunity to intervene. So if a mistake happened on benchmark assessment 1, that would ultimately impact how you think on another standard down the road, there could be growth because now they're not getting that part of the problem wrong later.
It's an inference-based situation versus kind of what I'm looking
Teaching
for.
to
And
the
I
test
think,
yeah.
I think it's important and fair to our teachers to, and I think this is a problem I have with our current state assessment, we just know they're basic. We don't know how far grade levels they're behind, and then when we repeat assessment, or even when we do the new pilot, we really don't have a way to see growth. And I'm looking for growth because I think our teachers are working hard, they're trying to lift up students, but we're not following cohorts and we're not looking at growth. And to me, that's very important. So I'll just leave that out there as a statement.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so KU is working with the old test, and who are you working with for this new one?
IAS, and they'll be presenting to you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right. With that, seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for being here today and all your hard work.
I maybe can't answer some of the questions because I haven't been at KFD only 2 years longer than Dr. Nugent, but a little bit longer. But I will say that in 1992 with whatever SEF QPA was kind of the beginning of state assessments, but they were just state assessments. When the federal government started doing the requirements for assessments is where a lot of the rules change. And so when I was teaching science, we actually had performance-based assessments that the teacher graded themselves, and then you sent a sample in, and then they were graded by a team. I had an opportunity to do that. So assessments have changed greatly over the last 35 years. So that's a little bit of that. So I just want to talk a little bit about basically some concerns that we've heard or that we have with some provisos. The first one, and I'll clarify on the over 150 Kansas educators, there were 141 teachers from all across the state. There were also some KSD folks that were also educators, so that's why that's in there. But a proviso in the current House budget bill would require applying old cut scores to the new test, which is statistically invalid and undermines the work that those teachers did. So that's one thing that's there. The next, there is a proviso in the current House budget bill that requires the IADA waiver as a pilot program. And although we have a lot of assessment to it, it also says it will become the new state assessment. It's a pilot program. We don't know if it's going to work. It may not pass federal muster. So we could be in a position where in a proviso, we are required to have a state assessment that doesn't meet federal requirements. We wouldn't be doing the pilot if we didn't think there was a chance that it was going to be working. Actually, if it does work, I will go out and say again, like I did last week, that we think this could be a game changer for having accountability and teaching and learning all happening at the same time. But again, we don't know that yet. That's why it's a pilot. We've heard concerns from districts that are named in the proviso that would be part of the pilot, that having them to report those things, publish them publicly, quarterly, may actually get in the way of trying to get teachers to buy in and do this. Because again, as Dr. Nugent said, giving the test 4 times instead of 1 time doesn't change anything. Being able to use the data, and you'll hear how that can work tomorrow, being able to use the data in a more timely fashion with staff is where you're going to see the difference. So that's an important part. And then the last part is a unilateral cut in state assessment contract that moves over 60% of the state's contribution for state assessments away from the current state assessment contract and into funding the IADA waiver will reduce services and have an impact on all school districts because, again, $940,000 out of the $1.4 million the state spends on state assessments would be spent on 6 districts. And that, we don't know what that would be because it hasn't passed yet all the way through, but that could have an impact on services that are provided to other districts. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that and happy to answer any questions about that.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It gives me a lot of heartburn, this first bullet point in particular, because this committee worked really hard on a budget to pass forward to appropriations, and we worked the budget bill this week, and I heard a whisper about something like this. But I'd like a little more information on the strings that are attached with this proviso language, particularly for the first bullet. What is the thinking on that? I'm glad we're having the conversation right now, but it feels like a little late since we've already worked the budget in the House. So I don't know if this is a Frank question or a question for you, Mr. Chair.
I mean, I can answer a little bit of, I mean, it was put in during when we worked the budget, and you know, his concerns in a sense learned about afterwards, and we are working on the details of resolving some of these as we go into conference. But first, the Senate's got to pass their budget so we can conference. So hopefully they get that done today.
I guess I don't really understand why we would put these strings attached to can you help me understand like the intent behind the proviso a little better and exactly what money is attached to it?
Well, there was $6 million that was going to KU, and the pilot program was not receiving any funds to do this pilot program. So the districts were having to pay for it. And so it was really an attempt to get them some help during the pilot program and belief in this, possible change of the assessment style, to make education better, to give more access to teachers for feedback as they're moving through the process, not post-mortem, not so far down the road that they can't utilize it. So the understanding was move some of that, but then found out there was state dollars, like Frank said, was the 1.4. Could the federal be moved around? And the intent was to get help to the pilot program for the extra work that they're doing. And like I said, trying to work out those details as we go through the budgeting process. Representative Moy.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And going off of that and my previous question about the federal funding, how soon are we going down those rabbit holes? What does that look like? What's on the landscape for us as a budgeting committee?
So the funding that we think would be available for the IADA pilot has not yet been announced by the federal government. We have been told, since they didn't do the grant last year, that surely they're going to do it this year. But until they do something, that's not there. So that could be between $1 and $4 million for each state to do that. I will say that there are currently one state that is doing an IADA waiver. There are other states that have been in and have dropped out. So there should be money there. They will have to award that by September 30th of 2026. So the window will open and close before the legislature, while the legislature is out of session.
So we won't know until next year whether we need to cover this pilot program.
So,
or the entirety of, yeah, okay.
I mean, so one way, if that is concerned, is that if the proviso were contingent upon not having federal funds available, that would be one way to look at doing that. But that's the problem, is that we have been given some confidence that there will be funding available, and that because our waiver is actually based on a pilot program going on, and other states have gotten it to try to develop a concept, that we've heard that it would be well received. But there are a lot of ifs in there, and until somebody says, yeah, here's the money, we're going to do that. So otherwise, we will try to do the pilot the best we can other than that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that transfer of funds, was that for which year?
So that's for 2027. So 2026, it's just basically the proviso for 2026 requires the state board to do what they were already doing. And then we think requires IAS and the districts to require what they're already doing, but I'd have to have them look at that. 2027 is when funding gets changed.
So technically, there's no money exchange at this point or for the rest of this year, correct?
Well, except for if the proviso continues and becomes law, then the way it's set up is that $942,000 could only be used for that purpose and could not be used for another purpose.
Isn't a proviso good for 1 year?
It's true, but that would be for the 27 year, which starts in July of 26 and goes through 27. So it would tie up those funds for the next fiscal year, and the legislature couldn't change that until January of 2027.
So correct me if I'm wrong, though, the budget for those transfer of funds isn't until 27.
But 27 starts on July 1 of 26.
So would you know anything on a grant type basis for those?
So we may know before the current assessment contract is up in September, because those actually run through September because they have to do work through that. So we'd know at about the same time that contract ended, whether or not there are grant funds available.
So is there, if the current contract ends in September, right? Has there been any other contracts offered to KU beyond that?
I think that's, I mean, we have to have a state assessment for 2027, so that's certainly in the works.
There's not a 3-year contract beyond there that was offered last fall?
Might have to go, so I think it had annual extensions, but it might have been a 3-year contract that had extensions to it. I mean, but even if the IADA process works, it's still, I mean, it's at least 4 or 5 years before that could become the state assessment. So we would need the current assessment for the next 3 years as the pilot goes on anyway.
And this proviso is only good for 1 year, so it wouldn't affect that beyond this 1 year.
But it could affect the services that are provided to districts during the 26-27 school year because the proviso impacts the funding for the 26-27 school year.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Harwood? All right, seeing none, thank you. Thank you both for your presentation. Is there anything else for the good of the committee today? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And look at that, 30 minutes early.